Blood from Silicon Valley. Fictional story based on the case, United States versus Elizabeth Holmes. Chapter 1. Brilliance on the front page. The sun hadn't yet touched the glass facades of San Francisco, and I was already standing in front of a huge banner reading, Theranos, the future of health. It was 2014. I'm Michael Gray, a court journalist with 20 years of experience. I had seen cases involving murderers, thieves in suits, and cops who crossed the line. But this time, I was here out of curiosity, not duty. Elizabeth Holmes had just made the cover of Forbes, a 30-year-old billionaire, dressed in a black turtleneck, with a hypnotic gaze and a voice that sounded like it was crafted in a NASA lab. She was the embodiment of Silicon Valley's dream, the girl Steve Jobs, who could revolutionize healthcare with a single drop of blood. I left the presentation hall impressed, not by the technology, but by the feeling that everyone around wanted to believe, even if they didn't understand what exactly. Back then, I didn't know that in 7 years I'd be sitting in a federal courtroom, hearing the prosecutor say, "This was not a mistake. This was fraud. Period." Chapter 2. Who is Elizabeth Holmes? She was brilliant. Even her fiercest critics admitted that. Born into a family of bureaucrats and financiers, she was told from childhood that success was not an option, but an obligation. At Stanford, she studied chemistry. In her first year, she told professors about an idea, a device that would allow all tests from just a few drops of blood. One professor tried to discourage her. "This is technically impossible, Elizabeth." But she already saw herself on the TED Talk stage, already imagined saving lives. At 19, she dropped out of university. A year later, she founded Theranos. By 30, she had raised hundreds of millions from political heavyweights, generals, bankers, and famous families. No one asked too many questions. They wanted to believe. She gave them what they wanted. Chapter 3. When Shadows Appear. 2015. The first crack appears. The Wall Street Journal publishes an investigation. Reporter John Carreyrou, a dull pedant with curious eyes, talks to former employees. One of them, Tyler Schultz, grandson of a board member, says simply, "We are deceiving patients." The device, Edison, the legendary automated analyzer, doesn't work. At best, it guesses. At worst, it endangers lives. Most tests Theranos performs on old Siemens machines, disguising this fact. The company responds aggressively, threatening lawsuits, issuing denials. But the wind had already changed direction. Chapter 4. Federal Attention. In 2018, Theranos officially dissolves. In 2021, the trial United States versus Elizabeth Holmes begins. I sat in the courtroom, every movement watched by dozens of eyes. She was no longer a goddess of innovation, just a defendant, but she held herself with dignity. Her black suit, straight posture, and composed tone all said, she had not given up yet. Prosecutor John Bostic spoke quietly but clearly. She knew the technology didn't work. She knew she was deceiving investors. She did this systematically. Holmes's lawyer, Kevin Dowling, fought hard. This was not a scam. It was a startup that failed. She believed in her technology. She is accused of failure, not fraud. The courtroom held its breath. I thought, what's worse, deceit or self-deception? Chapter 5. The Silence of Witnesses. On the third day of hearings, something unexpected happened. James Mattis, former U.S. Secretary of Defense, took the witness stand. Statuesque, with a deep voice, one of the most influential board members. "I didn't understand how the technology worked," he said simply. "I relied on Ms. Holmes's words. We had no independent technical audit." These words pierced the silence like a knife through silk. I glanced at Elizabeth. She listened calmly, but her eyes no longer sparkled. It wasn't the glow of a leader, it was an escape into herself. Next came a witness who shattered the atmosphere. Erica Chome, a young scientist at Theranos, trembling voice, said, "We forced devices to work on the edge. If it didn't work, we fudged it. It wasn't science. It was an illusion." Her voice cracked. She stopped several times to wipe tears. The courtroom fell into deadly silence. Some jurors looked down at the table. Others just stared at her. Chapter 6. A Victim's Face. The next day, another side of the story. Testimony came from Brian Thomas, father of a 10-year-old girl from Arizona. They turned to Theranos to test the child for diabetes. The test showed everything was normal. 3 months later, the child was in intensive care. Diagnosis: type 1 diabetes. Late detection almost cost her life. "I can't say Theranos is 100% to blame," Brian admitted. "But if not for that false result, we would have acted in time. This isn't just about business. It's about people. About children." Elizabeth sat silently. She swallowed once. But the room felt it. This was no longer a tech scandal. It was a human tragedy. Chapter 7. Defense plays all in. One of the most intriguing moments came in week 5, when Elizabeth decided to testify personally. A risk in U.S. courts, defendants rarely testify. But her defense understood. The idealistic image was the only chance. She rose to the stand. Black suit, blonde hair tied back. She was ready. "I believed we were saving lives," she began. "I didn't want to deceive anyone. I was sure the technology would work." Her voice was calm, almost hypnotic. But the most striking was her description of co-founder Ramesh Sunny Balwani. She claimed he controlled not only the business, but also her personal life, and that he psychologically abused her for years. "I lived in fear. Fear of failure, fear of punishment, fear of weakness." The court was stunned. This twist was not part of the original script. Now the jury had to weigh not only facts, but context. Chapter 8. The Temptation to Escape. After hearings ended, Holmes was released on bail. She had to stay in California until sentencing. But in January 2022, federal prosecutors discovered she had bought a ticket to Mexico on a private jet, scheduled for January 26th. Prosecutors immediately filed a motion. This was an attempted escape. The defense responded that she just wanted to go on a honeymoon, and the trip was canceled. The judge didn't change her status, but sent a clear message. One more step, and she'd be arrested. This episode changed the tone. Even sympathizers began to doubt. If she truly believed in her innocence, why buy a ticket? Chapter 9. The Verdict. January 3rd, 2022, a date Holmes will remember forever. After long hearings, the jury returned. Each face was a mask. Everyone knew their decision would enter history. I sat in the third row for the press. My notebook shook in my hands. Cameras in the room were off, waiting for the click by the exit. Judge DeVilbiss began reading the verdict in a voice that echoed through the silence. In the case of United States versus Elizabeth Holmes, the jury finds the defendant guilty on charges of investor fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and providing false information. Pause. On charges of patient fraud, not guilty. The room did not applaud or shout. Everyone was silent. It was a victory for prosecutors, but not absolute. For some, punishment for manipulating millions. For others, not enough for the harm caused to patients. Elizabeth stood still. She didn't flinch or cry, but her jaw was clenched as if every muscle was holding back an explosion. Chapter 10. 135 Months of Reality. November 18th, 2022. On the day of the final sentence, the courtroom was packed. On the bench sat her relatives, former investors, media. I sat closer than usual. I wanted to see her eyes. The judge read the sentence. 11 years and 3 months, Imprisonment in federal prison. 3 years supervised release after. Restitution, $452 million. The silence after these words was as loud as the sentence itself. There was no anger, only closure. When the judge allowed the defendant to speak, she approached the microphone and said softly, "I'm sorry. I accept responsibility, and I don't want anyone else to suffer because of my mistakes. I truly wanted to make the world better." These words changed nothing but became her last act on the public stage. Chapter 11. Woman Behind Bars. May 2023. Elizabeth Holmes arrived at the federal prison camp in Bryan, Texas, escorted by marshals, without cameras or journalists. Her new reality: barracks, rules, no internet, kitchen duty. She was no longer a CEO but inmate 24,965 to 111. In the first days, she received a library card, took a book on psychology, then memoirs of women leaders, and finally Orwell's novel. The former billionaire no longer had black and white turtlenecks or Davos presentations. Her voice was now silence. Only occasionally did prison staff notice her writing, long and focused. They say it's a diary. Chapter 12. Societies afterward. In the days after the sentence, the internet flooded with headlines. The rise and fall of Theranos. Silicon Valley's fallen saint. Steve Jobs syndrome. What happened to Holmes? Some called her a victim of the system that devours its own heroes. Others, the most dangerous woman in modern business. For investors, she became a reminder. Even billions don't replace due diligence. For startups, a warning: you can't fake reality for the sake of it.